Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. I'm back with my Rose Care Month by Month series, here talking about the month of August. The whole goal of this series is to place those rose care activities like pruning, feeding, watering your roses into their seasonal context so that you know when it's important to start these things, when you should maybe wind them up, and August is a good example of that. It is my last month that I'm really considering feeding and any heavy pruning of my roses for a while. Of course, that will vary a little bit by your climate, so I'll go into the reasons as well. So I want to start off with a good example of what a rose does when you prune it back hard during the season. This is a great example because a Beta Declini I did in a previous video. I think it was the June video where I cut this back from its over height and brought it back down to about 2.5 feet. Now, of course, you can see how beautifully it has bounced back. Lots of great blooms on here, lots of fresh growth. So moral number one of this story, don't hesitate to prune hard on a healthy, vigorous rose. It will bounce back quite nicely. But second thing is that do you really want to see this level of growth coming in the later months of the year? So let's say I did a prune right now and I'm expecting this kind of growth to come. That's going to be happening in the months of September and October, which might be pushing it a little bit towards the end of our season, depending on where you are. I'm still doing it here on the mild west coast, but it might be a little bit much to ask of your roses if you're in a harder or colder winter climate. So I'm suggesting that August is kind of the cutoff, or let's say the decision point about whether a plant needs any more pruning for the year or whether you let it go through the fall and let those stems harden off and let it get ready for the winter. But to offer some encouragement, here's some more examples of the results of well-timed heavy pruning even within the growing season. This is Folklore, which took a heavy pruning again in June and has bounced back beautifully. This is Robusta, an absolute workhorse in my garden, and I have pruned and deadheaded it repeatedly and aggressively throughout the season, resulting in multiple flushes from the month of May all the way till now. And you know what? If I'm pretty aggressive with my deadheading here, I might even get another flush before the winter comes. While we're talking about deadheading, let me talk about the special case of the rugosa roses where deadheading is a bit of a trade-off. I'll get you some close-ups of this bush here, but you can see that it comes up with these beautiful ornamental hips, large, juicy, even edible. And what you can see with the rugosas, they're a special case because they will continue to flower whether you deadhead them or not. The thing is that if you deadhead, you'll get more flowers more quickly, but at a certain point in the season, it may be a choice to leave those flowers and let them ripen into these beautiful hips, especially going into the autumn where it becomes food for wildlife or for yourself. Just to round out the main activities, people will ask, is late summer like this a good time for planting a new rose or transplanting? And as I said last month, planting is fine as long as you keep up with the watering. It's actually good to get them established, and sometimes it's easier to manage the watering in the ground than it is in a pot. If you're talking about transplanting, I'd still say marginally you're better off waiting a month, go into the cooler month of September if that's your climate, and you may have an easier time keeping the stress low on a newly transplanted rose. Fertilizer and soil, while it is still a great time to mulch your roses, I'm talking about wood bark or kind of organic mulches that don't add a ton of fertilizer, fertilizer itself becomes a tough judgment call. As with the heavy pruning at this time of year, heavy fertilizer can encourage fresh, lush new growth from your roses. In my climate, they might be able to harden off before winter, but if you're a little bit closer to cold weather, then it might not be a good idea. So I always consider August to be my kind of decision point on whether a plant is looking good. I leave it alone. And if it requires a heavy prune at this point, like really for the health and well-being of the shrub, or if it looks like it's severely undernourished, then I might do a little bit of corrective feeding at this point. But in general, August is the cutoff point. I have just one interesting point to make on the watering of roses, and often we give great consideration to the temperature. Obviously, higher temperature, like we do have in August, means we need to give more water to the roses. However, there's another one that goes underappreciated, which is day length. And in the terms of day length, June was the peak. We're June, July, August, 2 months past the peak longest day of the year, and actually my watering has gone down since then. If I were still watering at the same volume and frequency in this greenhouse, these roses would be soaked most of the time. So I've had to drop it down probably in the range of 20% already just to allow for the lower day length, so they're going through the water less. It's something to think about now. Of course, you still need to attend to watering, but we are on the downslope. The pest I'm going to highlight this month, and I'll give you some close-ups shots because it's not going to be easy to see with the naked eye here, is spider mites. And you can see on this foliage that there's a color shift and there's a stippling on that, and I'll give you some examples of that as well. But basically it takes a color tone shift towards the bronze. It's called bronzing, and that's an idea that you have spider mites on the backs of those leaves. You'll see delicate webbing on the back, and if you have really good eyes or you look with a hand lens, you'll see little spider-like creatures, mites, going around and feeding on the backs of your leaves, laying eggs and forming large colonies. The thing about spider mites is they do like the drier weather, so obviously we get into late summer, warmer temperatures, they reproduce faster. You can often see the outbreak get out of control at this time of year, where you don't see it as much in early spring. The thing to use for it, I use sulfur. So sulfur is kind of one of these broad spectrum antifungals, which is great for powdery mildew or black spot as a preventive, but also is quite effective against spider mites. So we have some spray residue of sulfur, and the other thing I like about sulfur is you don't really end up with pesticide resistance when it comes to these diseases, and also that it's relatively safe to use. So you're just using a powder that you're putting into water, you're spraying it on. You don't really have to deal too much with protective equipment. There isn't a dangerous residual, and it really is quite targeted towards mites rather than just broad spectrum against all sorts of insects. If you are timing out your propagation activities, that's a little update on semi-hardwood cuttings, which would have been taken during the summer. Now these here are fresh cuttings, and I'm still taking cuttings this time of year, but knowing that this becomes kind of a natural cutoff point, let me tell you why. It takes about 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe, to develop initial rooting, and then after that I give them another 4 to 6 weeks of sort of rooting before I repot them into pots like these. And of course you can see that these were taken much earlier in the summer, probably in the range of, again, about 10-12 weeks ago is when I took these cuttings, and now they're potted, and the ones that are on the floor here, new potting, will become these ones that are a year old, and we have those for sale on our website. So basically it takes a full year to get up to a very mature stage in a 4-inch or 5-inch pot, where I would be happy enough to put them into the ground in people's gardens, and that comes from this. So if we start today, and now we're talking August, we have September, October before you're potting it, and depending on your climate, the amount of rooting time that you'll have in this size of pot becomes limited. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Certainly it's always worth practicing, and whether you get them through the winter or not, well, that might take some extra effort on your part if you start late in the season like now. I always like to end these videos with a spotlight on a rose worth showing. People ask me, what's your favorite rose? And it comes down to the fact that whatever's impressing me at the time. This is our trial garden, so all of these came to us as trades, and this one is a variety called Lady Jane Grey, a Harkness rose that I believe is now out of patent, which is why it came to me as a cutting that I could try out here. Big, glossy, green, healthy foliage and perfectly formed blooms in a very difficult season. We've been hit pretty badly with drought conditions, with spider mites, with thrips that tend to ruin the blooms. This one came up with perfectly clean, perfectly formed blooms. I don't know if that's a fluke, but it really was the star right now. So I'll show you some photos of that and say that's my rose of the month to feature. If you have any questions about the contents of this video, any advice for the rose care through the year, just go ahead and drop those into the comments below the video and I'll see what I can do to help.